if we're going to reduce the cost of housing, we've got to build more homes. And if part of the reason we can't build more homes is it takes too long and the planning applications are appallingly bureaucratic, we've got to cut that.
Tom, just quickly on that, before I go back to Tobias's question.
Sorry, yes, of course.
Can you name me one city in the world which built its way out of the housing crisis?
Which built its way
out of the housing crisis?
Well, it depends what you mean by out of.
Built enough houses that housing became more affordable over time in the last 20, 30 years.
Well, there are lots of places in which housing is far more affordable than here, lots of other countries in which there's, and far less scarce.
Like where?
Well, I don't know, like in Australia, for example, or in other parts of Europe.
So you think housing's affordable in Australia?
I think housing is more affordable in Australia than it is here, yes.
Significantly more?
What do you mean by significant?
Listen, so I've worked all over the world with people from all over the world. I've got YouTube channel watched all over the world, and I constantly get people who think the housing crisis is just in their country. People in London think that, people in New York think that, people in Sydney think that, people in Melbourne think that, people in Vancouver think that, people in LA think that, people in Mumbai think that, people in Tokyo think that, people in Shanghai think that. It's a global problem. You don't build your way out of a global problem. It's a global problem.
So the answer to the housing crisis is not to build more homes?
You need to protect yourself from the billionaires. If you are competing with billionaires...
You've got to build more homes.
I know that's a very easy answer, right? But listen, I make a lot of money betting on the economy, and I think you're wrong, Tom. I'm not saying we don't build more homes. I'm not against building more homes, right? But look, go out in London, right? Go to... Listen, I don't know where you grew up. I grew up in a place called Ilford, right? Mm-hmm. Street, small terraced houses, right? Go to that street now, every single house, expanded up, expanded back, massive blocks of flats blocking out the sun. Is Ilford more affordable? No. No, it's not. You don't build your way out. Listen, all you do is you turn my home city into a slum. That's all you do. That's all you do, Tom. Listen, and I know that's not the answer you want, Tom, but there's a reason that I make millions of pounds betting on the economy, because I'm good at this, right? And I tell you right now, you're not going to build your way out of it. And housing will become less affordable unless we deal with the problem of rapidly increasing wealth of the rich. It's not just housing, Tom. Look at the stock markets. Look at the gold price. Look at land prices. Every single asset class in the entire world has increased massively in the last 5 years, in the last 20 years. This is not a problem of housing. This is not a problem of London housing. This is a problem of ordinary people's inability to compete with a massively growing, wealthy, super rich class.
The thing that's keeping people poor is the cost of housing, which has continually gone up and up and up. The reason people have lots of consumer goods is, for the most part, that those things have become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And mostly, not always, better. And so those things are a smaller and smaller part of our overall expenditure, whereas the cost of housing, if you're below a certain age and haven't paid off your mortgage, is becoming bigger and bigger. So there's a fascinating thing I read recently which amazed me, which is the typical American home in 1950, 1955, 1960. If you added up what they'd paid for all their possessions, which would be one or two cars, television perhaps, oven, furniture, clothing, typically what they'd paid for all the bought goods in and around the house was about the same as what they'd paid for their house itself.
Oh, wow. Well, it wouldn't be anything like that.
Now, if you think about it, unless you owned art or fantastic jewellery collection, it'd be impossible to find anybody in Britain whose possessions were worth more than their house, pretty much. I mean, there's probably going to be a limo driver somewhere, but apart from that, it's impossible. And so what you realise is that the extent to which I think the gains that have been notionally brought to us by ever more effective free market capitalism and globalisation and everything else have largely been mopped up in just effectively increased property prices.
I earn £8 an hour as a self-employed. I'm 43 years old. I've got no pension, no holiday pay, no sick pay. But my main concern is immigration. I want to stop immigration altogether. I don't think you're going to achieve anything, Gary, because a lot on your side, they just keep calling us names. People with my concerns, they just call us names. They belittle our concerns as well. So we're at like an impasse. You're probably I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're correct on your economic prospectus, but the fact that so many on your side just belittle us, call us names, belittle our concerns, just means that we're never going to come to your side. Until people with your economic viewpoint start taking our cultural concerns more seriously, there will always be this impasse. I have never heard anyone say that they want a wealth tax and that they also want to stop the immigrants coming in.
Yeah, I do worry that you might be right, George, to be honest. I live near Canary Wharf, and there's one of these migrant hotels near where I live, in Canary Wharf, and my cameraman told me there was one of these protests the other day. So I went down, the cameraman shoots my YouTube, I went down after I shot the YouTube, and I went there to this hotel, and there was the protesters on one side, and there was the counter-protesters on the other side. And, yeah, to be honest, it was, as you say, George, it's two groups of people standing on opposite sides of the road, pointing at each other and calling each other names. And I worried when I saw that was a little bit of the vision of the future of this country. I'm an economist, right, and I stick to economics. I'm not an expert on immigration. I think the primary economic concern is growing wealth inequality. I'm very confident on that. But I think if people such as yourself, George, want there to be low rates of immigration, you've got every right to say that, and you've got every right to believe that. And I do worry that this growing division is going to tear our country apart, and it's going to prevent people like me from getting the change that I need. And what that will mean, George, is that people like you and people like your kids will suffer very much economically. And I worry, and this is what keeps me up at night, to be honest, George. How do I convince the public? I don't, this reminds me of Brexit, my brother was very anti-Brexit, my dad was very pro-Brexit, and I saw these fights at the dinner table, and when I saw what was happening outside this hotel, this is my country, and I don't hate people on either side of that road. I'm not an expert in immigration, and I'm probably never going to be. But I'll tell you this one thing right now, if the ordinary hard-working people of this country allow themselves to be divided on this issue, then the current state of play will continue, which is rich people getting richer and richer and richer and richer, while working class people get poorer and poorer and poorer. So listen, George, I've got every respect for you and your opinions, and I would encourage all the people who oppose you to resist that temptation to point fingers and call names. Because listen, if the people of this country are divided, then they will lose, right? So you're going to need each other, George.
I've got to be very brief here, because I am actually a Georgist. Not many people are, but strangely, it's a belief that you should tax the value of unimproved land as the primary source of tax revenue. Now, the argument for this is very simply, if you buy a car, you're paying other humans money for something which wouldn't exist were it not for the efforts of the people making the car. If you pay a landlord for land, you're effectively renting from them something that would exist anyway. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get into this in huge detail because it really requires a programme all of its own. But if you read a book called Progress and Poverty, written by Henry George in the 19th century, it's Vivian Westwood, by the way, was another proponent, along with Winston Churchill, Richard Nixon.
You're in good company.
I'm in very interesting company here, but it's an eccentric movement that essentially says that, I would argue, and maybe I'm driven in this partly because I sold an apartment in London which I didn't need to sell in about 1994, which would now be worth £1 million. But one of the reasons I sold it is I didn't think I had the right to buy, through the property market, the right to tax the young. And that's effectively what you're doing. If you're a buy-to-let landlord, you're essentially creating a form of indentured servitude, albeit of a different kind, where you're effectively, what you're saying is, I plan to fund my retirement cruises through the efforts of someone aged 25 who's paying 50% of their after-tax salary and rent. Fundamentally, I don't think this is a good use of... This is an appalling place for people's wealth to be stored. I think the use of property, if you like, as an investment good rather than the use good is fundamentally distorting. I'd also create the argument, which is maybe the reason the 80s and the 90s were so good, was that people were getting richer, but property prices hadn't yet caught up. There was a kind of lag effect where you could, and I'm not making this up, if you had a reasonably good salary in London in the 1980s, paid salary, you could, with 2 or 3 years' salary, buy a 5-bedroom house.
Well, the Simpsons I used The Simpsons. The Simpsons was the typical family that was taking the mick out of in the cartoon. No, that is now aspirational. No one in their 30s can do that. One person going out and working, mum staying at home, 3 kids, car, mortgage.
Do you want to really depress